The year 1200. In wind-lashed coastal Iceland, Viking turf and timber roof shed relentless rain beside you, sealing living spaces against driving storms and freezing drafts. The Viking turf and timber roof used heavy turf sod layers weighting the surface, so coastal winds pressed downward rather than lifting edges during violent storm exposure events. Beneath that mass, the Viking turf and timber roof laid overlapping birch bark sheets, forming a continuous waterproof membrane before moisture ever reached timber framing within the structure. With water already deflected, the Viking turf and timber roof set steep timber rafters, angling roof planes so rainfall accelerated downward instead of lingering across bark seams below. At the perimeter, the Viking turf and timber roof installed stone-lined edges, physically anchoring sod layers so gale winds could not pry them upward from the structure itself. Those anchored slabs on the Viking turf and timber roof relied on compressed grass roots, interlocking each sod piece into a dense water-resistant barrier across surfaces above. To organize runoff, the Viking turf and timber roof raised a central ridge beam, elevating the seams so rainfall split cleanly down both slopes toward the eaves below. Supporting that mass, the Viking turf and timber roof spaced timber purlins closely, distributing turf weight evenly so the roof surface resisted sagging between rafters under load pressure. Where runoff concentrated, the Viking turf and timber roof increased outer sod thickness near eaves, creating heavier edges blocking wind-driven rain from curling beneath layers of bark. Under those layers, the Viking turf and timber roof overlapped birch bark seams downhill, forcing water to travel outward rather than upward through capillary action between fibers inside. In harsher coastal exposure, the Viking turf and timber roof adjusted slopes steeper, shortening water contact time across bark and sod surfaces during frequent rain events there daily. As storms repeated, the Viking turf and timber roof benefited from heavy turf mass, which dampened vibration and limited joint loosening within rafters and purlins over years' exposure. To hold alignment, the Viking turf and timber roof embedded rafters directly into wall plates, preventing lateral sliding under saturated turf loads during prolonged rainfall periods there annually. Beyond the framing, the Viking turf and timber roof extended the bark layer past rafters, creating a drip edge shedding water outward away from wall junctions below continuously. That extension allowed the Viking turf and timber roof to lengthen eave overhangs, shielding wall joints from repeated splash erosion caused by runoff impact during storms there often. To maintain continuous coverage, the Viking turf and timber roof cut sod into tapered blocks, fitting tightly along the curved surface without open water channels forming gaps there. At the most vulnerable seam, the Viking turf and timber roof packed ridge turf thicker, sealing the apex against direct water entry from driven rainfall above it continually. Holding internal spacing fixed, the Viking turf and timber roof secured timber purlins with pegs, stopping rotational shifting during high winds acting against turf load forces there above. Away from constant coastal rainfall, the Viking turf and timber roof flattened pitch slightly inland, reducing material stress where runoff volumes decreased across bark surfaces there annually overall. To strengthen cohesion, the Viking turf and timber roof oriented sod with roots upward, increasing interlocking grip between adjacent blocks under moisture expansion after rainfall cycles there repeated. Reducing vulnerability, the Viking turf and timber roof harvested birch bark in wide sheets, minimizing seam count across the roof plane where water could penetrate below layers there. With material secured, the Viking turf and timber roof kept a low profile, reducing exposed surface area. Facing direct wind force along coastal ridges, there frequently impacted storms. During rainfall, the Viking turf and timber roof allowed turf to absorb moisture first, slowing penetration before water reached bark layers beneath the sod mass below it continuously. Where load concentrated near the apex, the Viking turf and timber roof spaced rafters closer, supporting heavier turf accumulation safely along the ridge beam there above walls below. To secure vulnerable edges, the Viking turf and timber roof placed heavy eave stones atop outer sod, preventing peeling during gusts that lifted loose layers there previously observed. Even when wet, the Viking turf and timber roof relied on birch bark resin content, which naturally repelled water within fibers before seepage formed below layers there beneath. To prevent standing water, the Viking turf and timber roof smoothed slope transitions, eliminating small curvature breaks where pooling occurred along the roof surface before erosion started there. Because wind exposure varied, the Viking turf and timber roof adjusted sod thickness by side, reinforcing areas facing prevailing storms that forced rain inward most often there directly. At the crest, the Viking turf and timber roof folded ridge caps sod over the apex, sealing exposed bark edges from wind-driven rain impact above them continually. Underneath, the Viking turf and timber roof used triangulated timber framing, distributing turf weight evenly across the roof span without overloading single beams there structurally below it above. To reduce wind grip, the Viking turf and timber roof trimmed outer sod flush with edges, removing protrusions that caught airflow along the perimeter there previously present before. Guiding runoff deliberately, the Viking turf and timber roof aligned bark seams parallel to slope direction, channeling water downward safely without crossing joints between sheets there beneath sod. As runoff increased, the Viking turf and timber roof carved shallow drainage channels along eaves, directing water away from walls before saturation damaged joints below them there structurally. Finally, the Viking turf and timber roof notched rafters into main beams, locking vertical positions and preventing separation under load from saturated turf, weight above them there continually. Sod blocks on the Viking roof were staggered carefully, avoiding aligned joints, preventing continuous water pathways through seams while maintaining cohesive, overlapping coverage that ensured runoff moved across the roof without penetrating layers. Ridge beam height on the Viking roof was calibrated precisely, balancing runoff speed along the slopes while keeping heavy turf layers stable, maintaining structural integrity across the roof during rainfall consistently. The Viking roof mass stabilized indoor temperatures by limiting cold drafts that entered through gaps between roof joints beneath dense turf and bark layers, ensuring internal spaces remained insulated against external airflow. Bark on the Viking roof was replaced periodically wherever rot compromised the waterproof barrier beneath sod layers, restoring protection that prevented water from reaching the timber framework supporting the roof structure. Sod for the Viking roof was harvested seasonally when root density was strongest, producing cohesive blocks that interlocked firmly across roof surfaces, forming continuous, heavy coverage resistant to displacement during storms. Timber species were chosen for the Viking roof specifically to resist rot, allowing rafters and beams to endure moisture trapped beneath turf layers, preserving structural integrity across the entire roof surface. The Viking roof maintained gentle curvature along its length, preventing snow buildup that increased structural stress on rafters and purlins beneath sod layers, while evenly distributing weight across the timber frame. Eave stones on the Viking roof were arranged in continuous rows along the perimeter, distributing the weight of outer sod layers evenly, preventing peeling or localized structural stress along edges. Bark edges on the Viking roof were tucked beneath sod layers, preventing wind lift exposure, maintaining continuity of the waterproof membrane, and protecting underlying timber components along the eaves consistently. Turf moisture on the Viking roof was released slowly after rainfall, reducing sudden runoff erosion below, maintaining cohesion between sod layers and ensuring water drained evenly along the roof edges. Rafters near the eaves of the Viking roof were widened, bearing higher sod thickness loads, supporting concentrated turf weight and preventing sagging or deformation of the timber framework beneath the surface. The Viking roof slope was oriented away from prevailing storms when possible, reducing direct rainfall impact on bark seams and limiting water infiltration through turf layers into the timber structure. Below, sod density was increased on the windward side of the Viking roof, reinforcing the surface against lifting forces generated by strong gusts, maintaining stability of turf layers along the roof slope. Bark at the ridge of the Viking roof overlapped multiple layers, providing redundancy where runoff concentrated most, ensuring the waterproof barrier remained intact beneath turf layers during heavy rainfall events. Timber joints in the Viking roof were tightened carefully, compensating for seasonal wood shrinkage, maintaining secure connections beneath turf layers, and preserving structural stability across rafters, purlins, and ridge beams consistently. The Viking roof silhouette was kept compact, minimizing wind leverage forces acting against the sod-covered surface, reducing stress on timber framing and preventing lifting or peeling during coastal gusts. Eave length on the Viking roof was balanced carefully, extending far enough to shed runoff while preventing turf collapse, under overhang weight, maintaining continuous coverage and edge stability along the perimeter. Bark membrane on the Viking roof was extended across the ridge, preventing split seam water entry beneath turf layers, maintaining continuous waterproofing along the apex and protecting timber framing beneath consistently. Sod blocks on the Viking roof were angled downward along slopes, locking securely against gravity-driven slippage, maintaining stable coverage and preventing individual layers from shifting or sliding during saturated conditions. Rafters on the Viking roof were braced crosswise, resisting twisting caused by uneven turf saturation, maintaining alignment of the roof plane, and distributing concentrated loads evenly across timber framing consistently. The Viking roof slope was steepened after leaks appeared in flatter earlier builds, increasing runoff speed across bark layers and preventing pooling that had previously caused penetration through sod layers. Bark thickness was increased in valleys on the Viking roof where runoff concentrated most, reinforcing these channels against erosion and water penetration, maintaining continuous waterproofing beneath turf layers along the roof surface. Eave stone size on the Viking roof was enlarged, countering stronger wind uplift forces acting on outer sod layers, maintaining edge stability, and preventing peeling or displacement during storms consistently. Sod was layered double depth at corners of the Viking roof, resisting peeling during gusts, maintaining continuous coverage across vulnerable angles, and supporting turf cohesion along intersecting slopes consistently. Ridge turf on the Viking roof was compressed firmly, closing air gaps that caused seepage during driving rain, maintaining waterproof integrity and preventing leaks beneath sod layers along the apex. Timber purlins on the Viking roof were raised slightly, creating space beneath sod mass for water to drain, improving runoff without saturating bark layers, and preserving structural stability of the surface. Roof pitch on the Viking roof was maintained at a minimum angle, ensuring continuous rain flow from ridge to eaves, preventing pooling, and maintaining consistent drainage across turf and bark layers. Bark seams on the Viking roof were sealed with resin, reducing microchannel leakage paths between overlapping sheets, maintaining waterproofing integrity beneath turf layers along the surface consistently during rainfall events. Sod was harvested thicker from wetlands for the Viking roof, holding greater cohesive strength, providing interlocking turf coverage, and resisting displacement across roof surfaces where moisture and runoff concentrated heavily. Rafters on the Viking roof were reinforced at mid-span, preventing bowing beneath soaked turf loads, maintaining slope alignment, and ensuring structural integrity beneath concentrated weight across the timber framework consistently. Roof curvature was flattened near the ridge of the Viking roof, slowing erosion from fast-moving runoff, reducing wear on turf layers, and maintaining consistent coverage along upper surfaces effectively. Eave sod on the Viking roof was cut shorter, reducing water wicking back upward into layers, maintaining turf stability along edges, and protecting the underlying bark membrane from saturation. Bark sheets on the Viking roof were replaced from ridge downward, following wear patterns caused by water flow, restoring continuous waterproofing beneath turf layers, and preserving structural integrity across the entire roof. Sod on the Viking roof was laid perpendicular to the slope, increasing friction resistance between blocks, preventing sliding, and maintaining turf cohesion consistently across the sloped roof surface during rain. Timber ridge supports on the Viking roof were widened, bearing peak turf compression weight at the apex, maintaining stability and preventing deformation beneath heavy sod layers consistently across the ridge. Roof mass on exposed Viking roofs was increased, stabilizing turf layers against storms, resisting uplift, and maintaining structural integrity across the entire roof consistently during high winds and rainfall events. Bark at the eaves of the Viking roof overlapped triple layers, where splash concentrated most, reinforcing waterproofing beneath turf, preventing water penetration, and maintaining timber protection along edges consistently. Sod root mats on the Viking roof were oriented crosswise, gripping adjacent blocks firmly, maintaining cohesive coverage, preventing displacement, and stabilizing turf layers along the roof slopes consistently across all surfaces. Rafters on the Viking roof were seated deeper into walls, blocking upward wind lift, securing turf mass, and preserving slope alignment along eaves consistently during storms and gust events. Roof slope on the Viking roof was corrected after snow accumulation strained timber frames, restoring runoff efficiency, reducing pressure on rafters, and maintaining alignment of turf layers consistently across surfaces. Bark joints on the Viking roof were staggered, preventing straight leakage corridors downward, ensuring water flowed across seams without penetrating timber beneath, maintaining continuous waterproofing beneath turf layers consistently. Eave stone rows on the Viking roof were thickened, absorbing repeated wind pressure cycles, distributing sod weight evenly, and preventing edge displacement or peeling consistently across all eaves along the perimeter. Sod on the Viking roof was compacted during installation, expelling air pockets, trapping moisture, forming dense, cohesive layers, improving stability, and preventing displacement between blocks consistently across the roof surface. Timber braces were added beneath heavy ridge turf sections on the Viking roof, supporting concentrated weight at the apex, preventing sagging and maintaining slope integrity consistently during storms. Roof profile on the Viking roof was lowered after wind damage increased on taller forms, reducing leverage against turf layers, stabilizing sod coverage, and preventing lifting consistently along the roof. Bark edges on the Viking roof were curved downward, directing drip away from seams, preserving waterproofing beneath turf layers, and preventing water from reaching timber framing consistently along roof sections. Sod density on the Viking roof varied, following measured rainfall exposure zones, adding mass where runoff concentrated, maintaining turf cohesion, and ensuring stability along slopes consistently across the roof surface. Rafters on the Viking roof were angled inward, tightening turf mass toward the ridge center, stabilizing overlapping layers, preventing displacement, and maintaining slope alignment consistently across roof surfaces. Roof pitch on the Viking roof was adjusted seasonally, based on observed runoff speed, ensuring water flowed efficiently from ridge to eaves and preventing pooling consistently across all surfaces. Bark membrane on the Viking roof was smoothed, eliminating folds that collected standing water, maintaining continuous waterproofing beneath turf layers and preventing seepage consistently across the roof surface. Eave reinforcement on the Viking roof was expanded where erosion undermined sod stability, adding stones and turf support, preserving edge coverage and preventing displacement consistently along all eaves. Sod block seams on the Viking roof were pressed closed after rainfall swelling occurred, maintaining cohesion between layers, reducing water penetration, and ensuring continuous coverage consistently along the slopes. Timber spacing on the Viking roof was reduced following localized roof depression failures, maintaining support beneath heavy turf layers, preventing sagging and distributing weight evenly across all surfaces consistently. Ridge turf on the Viking roof was shaped rounded, preventing water pooling at the crest, maintaining continuous runoff along slopes, and reducing pressure on timber framing consistently at the apex. Bark on the Viking roof was replaced before winter, freezing cracked, weakened fibers, maintaining waterproofing beneath turf layers, preventing seepage, and preserving timber integrity consistently across all roof surfaces. Roof slope on the Viking roof was standardized, preventing experimental leakage reoccurrence, maintaining uniform runoff, continuous turf coverage, and reducing stress on timber framing consistently across slopes. Eave stones on the Viking roof were repositioned, redirecting runoff away from foundations, preserving edge stability, preventing soil erosion beneath turf layers, and maintaining support consistently along the perimeter. Sod moisture levels on the Viking roof were monitored, preventing excessive weight collapse, maintaining cohesion, preserving turf alignment, and reducing structural stress on timber framing consistently across roof surfaces. Rafters on the Viking roof were thickened where storms repeatedly flexed joints, increasing load-bearing capacity, supporting turf mass, and maintaining slope alignment consistently across all roof surfaces. Bark sheets on the Viking roof were overlapped wider after narrow seams failed, improving waterproofing beneath turf layers, preventing leakage, and maintaining consistent protection along all roof slopes consistently. Roof curvature on the Viking roof was recalculated, preventing ice dam formation, maintaining continuous runoff across turf and bark layers, and preserving timber integrity consistently beneath roof slopes. Eave length on the Viking roof was shortened after wind tore outer sod layers, reducing leverage against turf mass, preventing displacement, and maintaining coverage stability consistently along edges. Sod on the Viking roof was harvested denser where earlier blocks separated easily, producing cohesive layers, maintaining slope coverage, and improving friction and weight distribution consistently across roof surfaces. Timber joints on the Viking roof were wedged tighter, stopping seasonal roof shifting, maintaining structural integrity beneath turf layers, preserving alignment of rafters and purlins, and supporting coverage consistently. Ridge cap sod on the Viking roof was extended further, sealing exposed bark edges, improving waterproofing, maintaining cohesion of adjacent turf layers, and preventing seepage consistently along the apex. Roof mass on the Viking roof was redistributed, correcting uneven water runoff patterns, balancing turf weight along slopes, preventing sagging, and maintaining consistent drainage efficiency consistently across surfaces. Eave stones on the Viking roof were interlocked, preventing displacement during peak winds, maintaining perimeter stability, supporting outer turf layers, and ensuring runoff was directed safely away from edges consistently. Across the Viking roof, layered turf, overlapping, bark, and precisely seated timbers reveal a continuous chain of adaptations. Sod placement, root orientation, and block density collectively stabilize surfaces, countering wind, rain, and snow. Rafters, purlins, and ridge beams were dimensioned and aligned to distribute concentrated loads from saturated turf, while curvature and slope adjustments directed runoff efficiently, minimizing pressure on critical framing. Eave stones, compressed turf, and staggered joints reinforced edges, countering localized uplift and displacement caused by gusts. Bark membranes overlapped sealed with resin and periodically replaced, ensured impermeable coverage along vulnerable seams, valleys, and ridges, while seasonal harvesting of dense sod optimized cohesion. Every adjustment, from rafter depth to ridge width, was embedded in the structure itself, translating environmental pressure into precise material responses. Over time, these modifications accumulated, producing a roof system that integrated mass, geometry, and material properties. Turf layers absorbed and redistributed forces, bark guided water along predetermined pathways, and timber joints transferred loads without separation. Spatial differentiation across the roof. Thicker, windward sod. Reinforced eaves. Steeper coastal slopes. Represents measured responses to localized stressors. Maintenance cycles. From seasonal sod harvesting to ridge bark replacement. Reinforce structural resilience while retaining a consistent, functional profile. Each element existed not as decoration or abstract design, but as a physical articulation of performance under repeated environmental conditions. Viewed together, these adaptations exemplify a human pattern of translating observation into durable material solutions. Timber, turf, and bark were arranged to record functional knowledge. Where rain pooled, where wind exerted force, and where structural reinforcement was necessary. The Viking roof endures as a precise system, its layered complexity preserving accumulated understanding. In quiet, exposed landscapes, these roofs stand not as monuments, but as instruments of environmental alignment, offering a tangible record of repeated testing, repair, and adjustment. A meticulous ledger of human engagement with wind, water, and gravity, written in timber, sod, and bark.